Thank you for having me today, Keith. I am a complex disease navigator and COPD program coordinator that specializes in COPD and heart failure. As you know, that with both of these conditions, both of these chronic diseases, smoking is a huge contributor to these. So that really inspired me to get my tobacco treatment specialist certification, and then also to try and teach other people, what there is to learn about smoking, and especially vaping, as we know that is something that just keeps on climbing. So the objective today, or my hope is, by the end of this presentation, you're going to understand the reasons behind nicotine dependence. Through the marketing, through what is in these products, what is in vaping, and then also to explain why vaping is not the answer to quitting in general. So first, to understand nicotine dependence, we really need to understand the history behind it. So smoking has been around for a long time, and marketing has been noted to start all the way back from from 1789, and that was in a New York newspaper. Tobacco consumption steadily rose from the 1900s to 1970, and in the 30s and 60s, there was advertisements that you can see some images on the screen that were endorsed by doctors. So they had doctor's stamp of approval, they had popular celebrity endorsements, and they just promoted their product using other people's reputations. And then in 1950, tobacco industries began to market a filtered cigarette. So at first they were unfiltered, and now they're marketing as filtered, and they're saying that it's a healthier way to smoke. So I just want you guys to remember the word healthier. So they're saying that these products are going to be a better way to smoke. The first Surgeon General report was in 1964, and that was really when they started to link smoking to these negative health effects. So that was only 60 years since smoking became really popular. But I think that's important because 60 years, that's really not that long of a time. And you can figure that there was different health concerns throughout that 60 years, but I think we didn't really notice it right away because of the lack of social media, and they didn't have a good way to get the news around, and the money in tobacco companies is very heavy. So I think there's a lot of ways to sweep things under the rug. So now you can see that marketing switch. So you could see in the 1964, when they first came out with that Surgeon General report, now people are like, okay, we probably should stop smoking. So now you can see that switch here, and you can see the switch and how they try to get kids to start smoking now. Because now those people who are educated, and remember, smoking was really something people did when they had money. So, your doctors and celebrities and people who smoked, they had money. And now the switch is to kids and to people who don't have money. So those who are uneducated. So you see the Joe Camel kid-friendly cartoon. Then you have the advertisements in movies and in the video games. So there was 61% of movies that were PG-13 had smoking in them. And then you see the introduction of a new, healthier way to smoke. So sounds familiar, and that is with your vaping. And then they started to advertise with candy flavored. So again, targeting those children, and they want to make it look exciting for them and intriguing and enticing. And then now, currently in 2022, there was 1 in every 10 middle school and high schoolers admitted to using vapes, which is pretty significant since it's still fairly new. this is a graph to depict what I was talking about on the previous slide. So you can see in 1964, which is the peak of the smoking age, and now you can start seeing how it's declining. So what are electronic nicotine delivery systems? You will hear me say vaping, you'll hear me say e-cigarettes, but all essentially the same thing. But they were designed and advertised as a safer way to quit smoking. So they were used for smoking cessation, or advertised as that. They became in circulation in the mid-2000s, and they have only a few ingredients that go into these products. So that includes the nicotine, the carrier oils, and the flavors. And then there's 3 different generations. So your first generation is known as your cig-like model. So that one is the picture at the top. So that was really to help people transition into this idea of using a different product that is healthier. Same thing, you're getting the nicotine, you're getting that release of all the different chemicals that we like so much. So that was to get people to start smoking and really make it relatable to that smoking cessation. Then the second generation, which is your vape pen, and that one is more customizable. So people can refill their tanks, they can use different combinations, they can create their own flavors, they can add different amounts of all the different additives in there. So your nicotine, they could add more, and they could make the flavors really whatever they choose. And then the third generation is known as your personalized vaporizer. So this is where they could adjust the voltage. So you can adjust the voltage, and when they inhale, they're actually going to be getting or vaporizing more of that nicotine in each puff. So what is in these vape pens? Well, the number one ingredient, the thing that makes it so addictive, is the nicotine itself. It's interesting that e-cigarette liquid concentration, or what it consists of, is not FDA regulated. So it can have anywhere from 1.2%, which is a little bit less than a traditional cigarette, or up to 5%, which is 3 times as much as a traditional cigarette. And that's with the nicotine inside. So Juul pods, this product at once, I think now they've moved on to a different product, one that's more disposable, but Juul products at one point was the adolescent choice, and this contained 5% of nicotine. So in one pod, there is equivalent to 1 whole pack, if not more, of the nicotine in there. So they're absorbing this in high concentrations, and we're going to go over what nicotine does to the body and what it releases in our body that makes it so rewarding. But brands that are marketing that there's no nicotine have been found to have traces of it. And then, in fact, many people who do vape think that there's not nicotine in there, but really there is a synthetic form, or people just think that it's water and flavor. Nicotine increases the blood pressure, heart rate, it decreases the blood flow by narrowing arteries, and it causes lung inflammation. And overall, it just increases the risk of heart attack, stroke, lung cancer, COPD, and then other respiratory illnesses. So nicotine itself, by itself, has actually not been shown to cause cancer. It's all of the additives that are in it that nicotine makes addictive that have been known to cause cancer. So what is nicotine dependence? Inhaled nicotine enters the lungs and is rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. It reaches the brain in about 8 to 10 seconds. And then it reaches its maximum potency in about 5 minutes. Nicotine is absorbed through the mucosal lining. So that's like your nose and your mouth. And that takes about 30 minutes to meet that maximum level. It's rapidly absorbed through the lungs because of the surface area in the lungs. The surface area in the lungs is about equivalent to about a football field. So it's going through all of those different, crossing all of that different surface area. So it's really absorbing a lot more rapidly. But once that nicotine is absorbed, it binds to nicotine acetylcholine receptors on the surface of these neurons, and then a chain reaction occurs. So it's going to result in the releasing of 3 different chemicals. So the neurotransmitters dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. So dopamine is your feel-good hormone that gives you that reward and that pleasure. And then norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter and a hormone that boosts the alertness, arousal, attention, and mood and memory. And then serotonin is your emotion regulator, and that is how they feel, how they feel happy, anxiety, all of that. But research actually suggests that nicotine is or maybe more addictive than heroin and cocaine. It's pretty interesting. So this reaction and change in chemicals trains the brain and the body to expect that pleasure reward and that sensation. So when they smoke, because it's been releasing these 3 chemicals, it's going to expect to have that. So every time a person smokes, it's going to increase their need to have more nicotine to get that feeling again. So chronic exposure to nicotine causes desensitization and upregulation of nicotine and acetylcholine receptors. So this increases the tolerance to nicotine and withdrawal symptoms at the sign of depletion. So when your body is not getting that level or exceeding that level, you start going through these withdrawal symptoms. And that's the withdrawal symptoms are the opposite. So the dopamine, the norepinephrine, and the serotonin aren't being released in those high doses anymore. So then people start to feel that anxious, moody, sad. And we'll get into all of the withdrawal symptoms in a couple minutes. What is in the carrier, or what is in the pens, the carrier oils? So there's a picture on here that really does a good visual of the different things that are made up in these vape pens. So there's various amounts of concentrations of all of these different liquids because they're not FDA approved, and there's not just a standardized formula for them. So these various amounts of concentrations of the nicotine liquid is dissolved in propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin, along with the other flavors and the other sweeteners. So propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin have been used for decades and generally classified as generally recognized as safe. So they're not saying these are safe, but they're just generally safe. And for ingestion, not inhalation. FDA says never intended for repeat inhalation in a hot aerosol. In fact, other places, other chemical agencies have said the same thing. So a European chemical agency stated to avoid inhalation of propylene glycol in hot vapors and extremely high concentrations of aerosol. Another agency said the mist may cause irritation of upper respiratory tract and of the nose and throat. And then there was another one who said avoid inhalation of the mist and the vapors, and then use ventilation when handling. So I think it's very interesting that if you look at these products on their own, we talked about the nicotine, and then now we're talking about the carrier oils. When you look at these products on their own, other places have said, yeah, these aren't safe. These aren't safe to use. They cause addiction. They cause narrowing of the arteries. They cause irritation to the nose and throat. And yet, when we're using them in these vape pens, they're saying, hey, well, we'll put them all together and it makes something different. So maybe they aren't so bad. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind when we go through these when I go through this presentation, so you can really look at these products individually and then make your own choice if you think they are beneficial or not. So propylene glycol has been approved for this use in ice cream, liquid sweeteners, whipping cream, soda. It's also been used in cosmetics. It's used in antifreeze. But remember, they're generally safe. These are all inhalation or topical. I'm sorry, they're all ingested or they're topical that they're using them as right now. And then the vegetable glycerin is from soybeans, or it can be like a synthetic form. And those are found in laxatives and cough syrup and toothpaste and mouthwash, shaving cream and soap. In 2012, there was an American study that reported lipid fat or pneumonia, so fat particles in the lungs, due to these glycerin or glycerin-based oils. And then in 2019, they did a study where they exposed mice to these flavors or to these carrier oils with and without nicotine. And they found that the carrier oils were depositing those fat globules, and they built up in the lungs, and it impaired their immune system and made them more vulnerable to infection. And then researchers are finding that there's several studies that are saying that these chemicals in here, these additives in here, are being changed because of they're being heated at high levels of heat. And so that's changing the chemical composition of these carrier oils itself. And there's really not a lot of studies that have been, done on that specifically. However, there was information that I was able to find on propylene glycol being used in fog machines. And they were using these fog machines in the theatrical events. So for different plays and theatrical events. And there was several studies or several people who had said that the regular exposure was causing them to cough more, have dry throat, would increase their upper airways symptoms, and then decrease their lung function. So I thought that was pretty interesting when you think about how they're inhaling it, and they're not inhaling it, probably on a pretty regular basis, but with vaping, they're really doing it for many, many years, several times a day. And there's been already studies from people who were inhaling it through theatrical events. So it makes you think about, what are these people getting when they're actually vaping and doing this on purpose? So the flavors, there are thousands of flavors that are being placed in these vape pens, but today we're just going to discuss these two, diacetyl and menthol. So diacetyl is a flavor that is used to create vanilla, maple, and coconut. And they're also used in some desserts like custard or any sort of like buttery flavored dessert. There was a study done. There was a bunch of people complaining of lung infections and decrease of lung function at a popcorn manufacturing plant in Missouri over 10 years ago. So using diacetyl, that is what gives the popcorn that buttery flavor. So when the flavor was added, they were inhaling that scent, that flavor, because it was being basically cooked up. And they were finding and linking it to irreversible lung disease called bronchiolitis obliterans. So they've nicknamed this popcorn lung because at this manufacturing plant in Missouri, 15 deaths were reported amongst 511 workers. And this was all due to the inhalation of the artificial buttery flavor. And that's not even to say that's how many deaths. There was more people who died, but in this report, they couldn't say that people died from other things. It was only the 15 that they could directly link to the bronchiolitis obliterans due to the diacetyl from the popcorn. But many other people are actually living with a lot of negative side effects. The bronchiolitis obliterans causes inflammation in the small airways, and it causes them to become scarred, and it results in like the permanent narrowing of those of the bronchioles. And then many were experiencing symptoms like coughing, shortness of breath, wheezing, tiredness, sweating, skin rash, worsening levels of oxygen. So those are all the signs and symptoms of the bronchiolitis obliterans. And when you have this, when people are diagnosed with this, unfortunately, their life expectancy is only about 6 years. And then menthol, another popular flavor, has been known to just generate a greater number of toxic microparticles. So people who are using menthol, they're actually absorbing smaller microparticles, and it's causing them to take shallower breaths and having poor lung function compared to those of non-vapors or non-menthol vapors. And it's really regardless of their age, gender, and race. So in general, the menthol was causing poor lung function on top of, all of the other things that vaping does. So e-cigarettes, when you think of e-cigarettes and how they wanted to use it as smoking cessation, so let's compare the two. So e-cigarettes versus the nicotine replacement therapy. E-cigarettes, the really only strong strategy that they have is they say harm reduction. So they keep bringing up the fact that it doesn't have 7,000 chemicals in it. Harm reduction is modifying a hazardous behavior to convince the consumer that their product is less harmful. So if a product is less harmful, the common consensus is that it must be healthy, right? So let's think about that for a second. We're looking at and we're comparing it to regular cigarettes. We know with all the evidence, with all the time, with all the research, what that does. Now they're saying that e-cigarettes are less harmful because they only have 4 of the chemicals. And as we looked at before, all of the different research that is around these chemicals so far have not been, individually, have not been very positive. In fact, they have been causing deaths at popcorn factories and hospitalizations and all of that. Now, in 2017 to 2019, there was a study that evaluated the effectiveness. So they compared the e-cigarettes to that smoking cessation. And the conclusion was that those who quit using the e-cigarettes were actually more likely to return to traditional cigarettes, or they started using dual use. So they started using both. So dual use is when they were still using the vaping and they were using traditional cigarettes. So vaping, they may be getting more of that nicotine or higher quality quantities. And then your traditional tobacco cigarettes with all those 7,000 chemicals in there. So not the best. And then e-cigarettes in this study were actually found to have 7 fewer successful attempts to quit smoking than people who used other alternative methods like the nicotine replacement therapy. And then there was another clinical case report of a 24-year-old. So they tried to quit smoking 3 times by using the abstaining method. And it wasn't very effective. So he kept going back to smoking. And then finally, he was able to quit using e-cigarettes. However, then he became addicted to e-cigarettes. And he needed to use the nicotine replacement therapy to get him off of the e-cigarettes. So just a really interesting case study to think about how he tried to quit using the abstaining method, wasn't able to. So yeah, he used and he was able to get off those traditional cigarettes with the e-cigarette, but then he became addicted to that. Now, the nicotine replacement therapy has been around since 1970, and it consists of like your patches, your gum, inhalers, lozenges, sprays. And when that's compared with behavioral health counseling, it's very successful. The nicotine replacement therapy offers a steady release of nicotine to alleviate that sudden plummet, which is what causes those withdrawal symptoms and those cravings. So nicotine replacement therapy really makes it more tolerable to quit, and it helps people to get off of that more gradually instead of depleting your body suddenly. These nicotine delivery devices do not come with those social rituals, so they won't associate, going and drinking. They won't associate that with smoking. It's not habit forming. The nicotine replacement therapy is not habit forming. And then nicotine replacement therapy allows a tolerance to wean, and it is more effective and safer and a way, way less addictive way to do it. So is vaping safer than smoking? We can't say something is less harmful just because, or we can't say that it is beneficial for us just because it's less harmful, especially when it takes decades to get all of that information in order. It took decades to link lung cancer to smoking, and countless deaths and trends to say that this was negative health effects because of traditional smoking. So it is going to take multiple decades and unfortunately a lot of different diseases and lives to be able to say that vaping is a healthier way to smoke. Vaping does expose you to fewer chemicals when you compare it to your traditional cigarettes, being 7,000 chemicals. However, the research just has entered its second decade, and we are, still looking at all the evidence. But when you look at them individually and what is out individually of what the carrier oils do, what the different flavors do, and what the nicotine does, and then when you combine them all together, I think we can make up our own guesses on where the future is really going to lead us. The CDC has confirmed in 2020 that there was 2,807 cases of e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury. So that's the EVALI, and 68 deaths attributed to that condition. And that was in 2020. I couldn't find anything more recent. And then in Johns Hopkins University, they published something in April of 21, and they said that several of the ingredients that are in these vape products, they're actually finding out that there are a lot more harmful chemicals that are in there as well. So we got your caffeine, your pesticides, many other harmful chemicals that you can find. So it makes you think, are there really only the 4 or 5 different chemicals that they originally said, or 3 chemicals that they previously said, or are there a lot more combinations of things being used now? And then many who have or who vape are getting more nicotine than they would using a combustible product. So more people are getting a higher dose of that nicotine. So remember, that is releasing those chemicals in the brain and really helping people to feel good, that high level of nicotine. But then now when they go to quit, they're going to have a exceedingly hard time doing so because their body is so trained at getting that high dose. One of the things that is super, super scary is to think about what these vaping pens are doing to the next generation. So when we think back to that marketing, and you've seen how they started marketing towards the youth with traditional tobacco cigarettes once they came out with the Surgeon General report. Now they switched their gears and said, we're not going to go after these highly educated people, but we're going to start influencing those younger ones to get addicted. And nicotine is actually changing the brain development. So often what starts off as a social experiment in school with these vapes, they're finding that 27.6% of high school students and 8.3% of middle school students, and I couldn't believe that because of the age when you're in middle school, just seems so young to be starting to do this. But when they compared that data to the data that was in 2021, they found a 1,800% rise of students now that are vaping. No words for that. And then 66% of the vapors are aged between 15 and 21%. And most of them were found that they didn't know that their products that they were inhaling, again, what started off as that social experiment, they didn't realize that they actually had that nicotine. So when they label it, no nicotine, they can have an artificial, or they could put it in there because it's not regulated. So tobacco-free is more likely to have a potent synthetic type of nicotine created in a lab. And that's what is very confusing to those of that age group, because they don't understand, they don't know, and they're not, of course, reading about it and doing the research on it. It's not really in their nature probably to do that. And then studies have shown that those who have never smoked and began to use e-cigarettes are 7 times more likely to switch to traditional tobacco in the future. So now they're going to be getting that higher amount of chemicals that we know that causes lung cancer. The dangers of nicotine dependence on the adolescent brain. Adolescents fully aren't developed. The brains aren't developed until the age of 25. So it increases the addictive tendency to other substance abuse. And it makes it so they don't have a good way of learning. So nicotine changes their brain activity, and it affects how they're learning. It affects their attention, their mood, and their impulse control and their memory, all of those things that are essential in school. It's going to increase anxiety. It's going to increase irritability and impulsivity. So not a good combination for our new leaders. And then it amplifies the feeling of depression, and it doubles the odds of the clinical diagnosis compared to those who have never used. Currently, there is no nicotine replacement therapy protocol for those who are under the age of 18. And for those who do want to quit, there are many resources that are out there that are anonymous. And I will make sure to have that information sent out to you guys on the different resources that are available to help if you do have any adolescents that come into your hospital that are looking to quit, or you want to talk to them about quitting. There's ways to text and get counseling. There's different Instagram profiles and stuff that they can get help in as well. So what should we be teaching our patients? Harm reduction does not make it safe. I keep on saying that because it's so true. And then despite the claims, research still shows that it is a not safe and reliable way to quit. And often people are just switching one habit for another. So think about that 24-year-old who tried to quit smoking and using vape and then had to quit vaping and using nicotine replacement therapy. And then vape products can have more nicotine than traditional cigarettes, which amplifies that dependence. So it's going to amplify the amount of nicotine that's going to the brain, the amount of happy things that are happening to our bodies, and then it's going to make that plummet much more significant when you're trying to quit, making it even harder. And then it took several decades to link the combustible cigarettes to the negative health effects. And really, it's only in its second decade of research. So how to quit smoking? Counseling is super important. Nicotine dependence is really only 20% of that physical dependence and 80% the physiological. So your physical dependence is your withdrawal symptoms. It's that plummet of nicotine receptors that are being emptied, and your dopamine, your norepinephrine, and your serotonin are decreasing at rapid rates. So when these things start decreasing, the body's like, hey, I want to feel good again. So you're going to have to start smoking so I can feel that again. That's where that craving comes from. Low dopamine causes a decrease of motivation, the lack of drive or will, the lack of enjoyment of anything. And then your norepinephrine is causing that foggy headedness, the poor attention, the poor concentration, and the poor productivity. And your serotonin is causing the lack of peacefulness, the agitation, more of your mood. So to help with this physical dependence, the most crucial period that people feel this is about for 2 to 3 weeks. So nicotine replacement therapy is helpful in these situations because it allows the person to come off of that level of nicotine craving. Instead of plummeting all the way down to zero and feeling these effects, they're able to kind of do this step down system. So every week or every couple of weeks, they apply a patch that's a little bit less of the nicotine in there, and a little bit less and a little bit less. And gradually they're able to wean off of this expectation of the body. And also, while they're just doing this step down system, they're able to create new life patterns. So they're able to get into new habits and approach the psychological side, the physiological side. So for the nicotine replacement therapy, it's recommended that people get this therapy for about 3 months, but really it can be needed for anywhere from 6 months and longer, but 3 months at a minimum to help people get over this craving. And then your physiological addiction, that's the complex relationship between smoking and their feelings. So people often smoke when they're sad, when they're depressed, when they're anxious, in social situations, or even in just like activities like driving and eating. So after they eat or while they're eating and waking up. So there needs to be a disconnection of these pathways that have been built over time. So we need to create a disconnection. So the way that we can do that is we need to get the person to retrain those neurological pathways. So when there's an urge, that person needs to not smoke and needs to do a new habit or do something else to retrain that new habit and work against or work with severing that old habit. So the addiction with nicotine, you need to sever that pathway and overall After a while, every time that you choose to do something different, it's going to make that pathway weaker and weaker and weaker. And it's going to give people the tools to deal with these stresses and anxieties differently when they create that new pattern. The best way to quit smoking, whenever I hear a patient say, oh, I'm going to be moving, or I'm going to be living with my sister for a while to help me recover. I say, well, now is the time to quit smoking then. And they're like, no, I'm going to be too stressed. And I just got out of the hospital. I said, now is the time, because they are going to be in a whole new element, a whole new situation. So their body and their brains aren't going to say after they wake up, I got to smoke. It's not going to be as ingrained as if it would be in their own house, the thing that they've really trained, and we go by sight and feelings, and it's going to be more manageable if they're in a completely new environment. So neurological pathways will become dormant over time, but then they can actually be reactivated with the use of nicotine. So that's why you hear the patient who said, I quit for 10 years and all of a sudden I started smoking again. Because unfortunately, they will pick up exactly at the level that they left off. If they were doing 3 packs a day, they're going to jump right up to 3 packs a day pretty quickly, where it may have taken them a long period of time to build up to 3 packs a day. So telling the patient to change their routine, to change their pattern, that is, with maybe they could do, instead of eating at the table, maybe they could go to the living room and eat if they knew that they smoked when they were in the kitchen. Or if they smoke, maybe they could set themselves a rule and say, I'll only smoke outside instead of smoking inside. Those are all things that will be able to retrain the brain to not, rely on that same pattern every day. And then make it a little bit harder too. The crucial period for that is about 3 to 12 months, but really this one can go on forever because we're retraining the brain. You need to retrain and find out the root cause. So that's what the counseling does, is helps to figure out where did it come from? Where are these relationships? How are you feeling? Let's think of alternate ways to work through this instead of relying on an artificial source of pleasure. And then alternative ways that you probably have heard about, but that are out there, are acupuncture, using pressure points of the ear. Both of these are going to release dopamines to help combat the cravings, or endorphins. Exercising is a great one. This one helps to reduce, the risk of cardiovascular disease. This one's going to help to help with emotions, help release all those good endorphins, even if it's a simple walk or simple, lifting some water bottles in the living room if your patient is older, and doing a workout that way. And then learning something new. So learning a new language, learning how to crochet, learning how to do puzzles, learning how to maybe reading a book, or just starting something new releases those good endorphins and makes you release all those pleasurable effects. And then going cold turkey is also a method. And some people are just really have it in them and they're strong-willed and they're able to do it. But unfortunately, the success rate is only about 5%. So the takeaways from this are, the CDC only says that 64% of people who smoke, or that 64% of people who smoke will die from a smoking-related illness. That's definitely more than half. So 64% of people will die from smoking-related illnesses. The life expectancy is 10 years shorter than those who don't smoke. And then nicotine is highly addictive. And of course, it leads to that heart failure, respiratory illness, gastrointestinal disorders, and then reproductive problems. And smokers will self-titrate. So they will self-titrate the vape to reach that level of nicotine that their body is so used to, and even exceed it, to make them used to or become used to a higher level of nicotine. So they're going to puff more, and they're going to puff more frequently. And then the aerosol is not water vapor, but in fact, it contains many other harmful chemicals. The Surgeon General in 2016 said that there's ultrafine particles, the flavorings like diacetyl, the chemicals found in car exhaust, heavy metals, and then lots of other different things that, other places have said that there's in there that they've done tests on. I don't have a list of all of them, but there was quite a list because it's not FDA approved. There's not a formula for every single vape that's out there. And then in recent 2018, the National Academy of Science report concluded that the ingredients in e-cigarettes are far less harmful than combustible tobacco cigarettes. However, the long-term effects are unknown. So I think that last one is pretty interesting because, yes, we do know that there are less chemicals in there, but when you look at all the ingredients individually, there is a lot of information out there that say that it is not something that is or should be continued and inhaled.